Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good. I just stumbled upon an awful ESPN chart for Offensive Rookie of the Year. I spent way too long photoshopping some text on the bottom of it, which you wouldn't think would take any time because it's text and you could just type it. But I'm a moron. So that's where we are. And I've tweeted that out and delayed. Well, I didn't actually delay the show by 20 minutes because you had something to do, but I would have delayed the show by 20 minutes for a stupid joke. So in the spirit of things, let's say that I did.
You know, I fully support the delaying of recording if it's going to be worth a good tweet, or if it's going to be worth a
mediocre tweet.
Yeah, if it turns out to, but how do you know if you don't actually sit down and do the work on it? So
it's true. Yeah, you always got to take a chance on a tweet. Yeah,
you do. Sure. You shot your shot, and it could have been worse. Could have been if we're going to do the Nietzschean situation here, could have been worse. Could have been worse. Well, welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Just in case you were curious from the, we got a tweet about this the other day. Yes, we do all of the openings live. We do all the openings new, just because of the possibility of content or whatever, and because the show would sound weird if I just ended up doing the pre-tape on it. Someone noticed all of the mess ups between the two shows, between the two clip shows. They're like, wow, you really mess up the intro a lot. It's like, I only do it like once every 8 or 10 shows. That's only like a couple times a year. And yeah, most of them are notable. We
strive for authenticity here on Norse Code. Yeah, we're here to serve up some freshly prepared podcast, very rustic podcasts.
Is that it's heritage. It's heritage podcast.
Yeah. Heirloom podcast.
Yeah, that is exactly what we are at. That's exactly what we're striving for. Welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are doing well. The season is over for the Minnesota Vikings after defeating the Detroit Lions this weekend. We had a lot of fun over on Patreon with the watch along for it, and we'll be talking about that here in just a little bit. But again, thank you guys so much. We will be going back to our once every 2 weeks ish for recording pods going forward. The regular season is over, so no more twice a week stuff. Sadly. We'll likely have a Super Bowl prop bet show as well. That is always fun. That's always something that's worth tuning in for. So, and when there is notable Vikings news to talk about, say the hiring of an offensive coordinator, again, I feel like we've done that like every year of the show.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Just like every year of the show, there's an episode where we talk about the new hire at offensive coordinator.
There was back in 20 when Norv Turner somehow managed 2 years in a row, 2015.
Yep.
You of course did retire that year, so
yeah, it was like
not retire, resign. Yeah.
So we've been doing this show since 2013, like in August, and since then it's either 6 new offensive coordinators or 7. It is staggering.
Yeah, that's a lot. So it was whoever was. So we had Musgrave and Bevel. Right during the show's run, we had both Musgrave and Bevel.
Yep,
I want to say. And then
tiniest of play cards.
Yes, right. And then you went Turner, Shermer, and the whole rigmarole with Zimmer. So that's 5 there plus. So it's 7, I think, offense coordinators in the 8 years of the show.
That's not something to be proud of, but here we are. So when we have news such as the new offensive coordinator coming in, we will be happy to come on and talk about it. I'll take your mailbag questions again. So, but before we start, just want to thank you guys so much for listening. If you enjoy the show, if you would like to hear more content from us, bonus content from us, including the library of back content that we have in the bonus episodes. You can find that over at patreon.com/NorseCode for $3.50 per month. You too can have access to the library of sorts of the bonus material, including the bonus clip show that was just for the Patreon people. So you can get that over at patreon.com/NorseCode. Want to thank our newest Patreon subscriber, Don Rio. Thank you so much for subscribing. People who were subscribed to the Patreon also were able to access the watch along that we did this weekend for the game, and that was a hell of a lot of fun. Once again, we had about 24 people in there at one point. There were a few people that were a little more active than others, but we did play bingo. That is accurate. I ended up making bingo cards for people for the watch along. The free space, in case you're curious, was Don being obnoxious, because that was just going to happen regardless. So that worked. Ones that ended up being included on the bingo card included turnover on the first play after halftime. Arif looks up a stat, which he is still fuming about.
If I had looked up a stat, I would have been fine with that having been checked, but it got checked twice because we redid it after somebody, or I guess two people simultaneously got bingo the first time around.
Yep.
And they counted the time I looked up the name of a city, which is like not a stat.
It turned into a situation where you ended up accidentally finding out the population of the city and saying it aloud, and at that point it became a stat. And I
didn't look up the stat.
As bingo commissioner, I decided that counted because everyone had been busting me on.
Well, yeah, as bingo commissioner, you lied. I understand that. No one's disputing the fact that you lied in order to get a joke off.
It turned into you Googled something, which, I mean,
yeah, we changed the definition of the partway through the bingo run.
You Googled information in order to say it on the broadcast that we were doing. It turned that
I didn't look up a stat.
That may be a liberal definition of the word stat, but you were still Googling information.
It's a liberal definition. Yeah, it's not. That's why it's a liberal definition of the word stat, in that it is not that word.
Oh, so this is going to be the time that you sit here and tell me about the problem with liberal definitions of things. Fine, we'll talk about something else then. We also had Bailey missed extra point and Bailey missed field goal on there as well. Gee, I wonder if
special team miscue, which we got a little bit into it, but ultimately I think we agreed that they had to be different.
They did have to be different from that.
Double count the extra point miss.
Chad Beebe was out there, and we were all ready to check the box.
Right, and Amir Abdullah brought kicks out multiple times.
We were prepared.
Very ready for this.
We were very prepared. Screen pass to Ham. Zimmer challenge on a meaningless play in the first half. That incredibly didn't get it. But Everson Griffin gets an offside penalty as what ended up winning people the bingo. So it was good to see that some things just never change. Yeah, there were a couple of others of actual note, including the video package on Kamara's TDs last week. That I ended up having to do an actual decision on that. Critical false start, also something that ended up happening. Cousins refuses to slide during scramble, also applicable. Somehow Zimmer didn't swear on camera this game. I was a little annoyed at that one. Although Dakota Dozier whiffing on pass protection, and where there was also one on Cousins gets sacked on a 3-man rush. Just like, really? That's tragic.
Yeah, and which is what I can't believe that happened. Like, I can't believe there was a 3-man rush, first, especially that early in the game.
Yeah, and of course it turns into a sack, and you just sit there like, I'm going to mark this on my card, but I'm still going to be full of hate when it happened. So, but we did have a little bit of fun with that, and had a little prize that I'm now going to be painting purple and sending to our reef. So that's fun. The kids were very excited when I told them I have a new Lego project for them. So hopefully this Lego Carson Wentz is something that they're able to put together quickly.
How disappointed are they going to be when they find out the watercolor paints don't stick to the Lego?
Oh, I'm confident in the number of paints and things we have in this house.
I believe in our painting.
I believe in the large amount of craft supplies that we have in this house. We're going to make the purple stick on that, so it turns into a Vikings Wentz outfit instead of an Eagles one. Although if it's going to be an Eagles one, they're probably just going to like quit halfway through, so I can probably just make it like a halfway thing. It'll look fantastic. It'll be the Sudfield of paint jobs. It'll be fantastic. So let's get into this show. The rest of the shilling, of course, is paypal.me/NorseCode if you'd like to do one-time donation, or threadless, NorseCode.threadless.com if you'd like to buy some swag. We're going to get into the Lions game right now. This isn't going to be the most comprehensive of reviews of the game because we have some season stuff to go over as well, but it is worth noting the Vikings were able to defeat the Lions with the help of Abdullah. This is the only team he scores touchdowns against. If you were a betting man, why wouldn't you have bet the farm on him?
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, it was silly not to put all the prop money on Alexander or on Amir Abdullah.
Yeah, this
145 yards, 2 touchdowns. Wow,
that's that's some good revenge game numbers. And I think I had even asked during the show, I was like, are we sure he hasn't just like played the Lions as a Viking more times now? Like, at what point does it stop?
So someone else looked this up on the Zoom call. They were like, "Yeah, it turns out Amir Abdullah's only scores as a Viking are against the Lions."
Yeah, I think that was Eric.
That's incredible.
yeah. We had both Eric Thompson and Luke Braun on the show on the live watch along at one point. Although we couldn't be certain for a while that it was Luke Braun because of his audio technical issues. Despite having
he had a whole boom mic set up with an XLR microphone plugged in.
Nicest setup of any of us, and it sounded the worst because Zoom decided to try to pick up his headphones as the microphone instead.
It's incredible. Couldn't hear a word.
You start winning Twitter contests on most actually listened to Vikings podcast, and it just goes to your head.
Hold himself there. Yeah,
just goes to your head, and you stop checking things like the audio settings in Zoom. Just say
careless. That's probably why we didn't win, is so that we'd stay on our toes.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. Everyone was within 4 points for the top 3, but yeah, that's exactly what it is. We needed to be that consistent underdog that opens their show by saying they're the number 1 podcast for the Minnesota Vikings. That's exactly what that was. So this was a game where there were a few things that that really did show what this team was all about. First off, we were able to get a bit of movement with Alexander Mattison. Obviously, he ended up scoring a number of touchdowns, but the defense was still the Vikings defense, and that jersey of Matt Stafford barely saw the ground.
Yeah. And the thing is, I mean, obviously the game would have gone better if Anthony Harris had held on to the pick. But I mean, Marvin Jones ends up with 180 yards, 2 touchdowns. I mean, in retrospect, we should have put Marvin Jones on the bingo card because he is a Vikings killer. But, initially I think we would have thought, hey, he's probably just a Xavier Rhodes killer. I don't know. We discussed this with our guests beforehand, the first time the Vikings played the Lions this year. And it turns out he did kill Xavier Rhodes this year. So we thought maybe it was just a Xavier Rhodes thing. But no, it seems to be a Vikings thing because he nearly went off for 200 against the Vikings. But yeah, Matt Stafford did not see the ground all that often. It was just a Hercules Mata off a blitz, or not even a blitz. I call it a blitz because he dropped back into coverage and then rushed the passer. But yeah, I mean, he wasn't even rushing the passer, and that's how the Vikings got the sack. Just kind of wild.
Not even like an adjustment. He might as well have just bumped into him at that point.
Right, yeah. They didn't get any quarterback hits aside from that sack. They didn't really get past the line of scrimmage all that often on defense anyway. There's one Todd Davis tackle for loss. I want to say there was an Eric Wilson tackle for loss or 2. But they just didn't get past the line of scrimmage either in run defense or rushing the passer. So, and it's the Lions' offensive line is actually not that bad. Taylor Decker's pretty good. Jonah Jackson's a somewhat promising guard as a rookie. Frank Ragnow I counted as one of my players of the year at center. I think that he's really great. But at the same time, like, one quarterback hit, that is your sack. So, like, combined quarterback hits and sacks, one. Absolutely nuts.
And what's crazy to me is that Stafford is a statue anyway. He is a statue quarterback, but he is beat to hell. There was a question of whether or not he should actually start this game because of the number of injuries he was walking in with. And he
had played. I want to say an ankle injury, a head injury, obviously the rib injury. That was probably the biggest one.
Yeah.
I mean, he had, I think at some point last week, some Lions people tweeted out that it might have been faster to just, say what parts of his body weren't injured, right? Like, he was beat up entering the game. And, one would not expect him to be able to kind of move or manipulate the pocket. And the one time he did, Mataafa beamed him. So, like, it was just an inability to get past those offensive linemen, which, again, not bad, but it's not like the Packers offensive line, right? Like, it's not like world-beatingly good. It's just pretty good.
It's just the Vikings defenders just happen to have the same vision as the Tyrannosaurus Rex from Jurassic Park. Like, if you stay still, they just can't find you. They're just not going to be able to make it through.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't move, I mean, a lion's vision is based on movement, right? If you don't move, maybe you'll be able to get past them somehow.
It's just ridiculous. Yeah, a statue quarterback that doesn't take any punishment during a game that's this hurt is quite embarrassing. But the defense was still able to at least get a pick out of him, and should have gotten more.
Yeah, I mean, the Harrison Smith pick was pretty good. I mean, they got their hands on a bunch of passes, right? Because Jeff Gladney ended up with a pass breakup, Todd Davis with a pass breakup. I think Blake Lynch got a pass breakup, and then Anthony Harris got his hand on two passes, one of which he should have been able to pick off, and obviously he did. And then Harrison Smith got the actual pick. So in the context of evaluating kind of the coverage aspect of the defense, I wouldn't say it was like extraordinary, right? Because Stafford was still throwing 9.5 yards an attempt. Like, it wasn't like they really shut that down. But there are moments that aside from covering Marvin Jones, they did an all right job. It would have been nice if I think there was one big play that Marvin Jones got on Jeff Gladney. There's one big play that Marvin Jones got on like Cordrea Tankersley. So that's like, I would not be that concerned about that going forward. There's one big play he got off an Anthony Harris. That was very weird. Harris had to, I think that was probably a cover 4 possession where Harris ended up having to play essentially man coverage against him. Like a cover 4 that turns into a cover 2, or it was just a cover 2. Can't really tell because the cornerback just dropped off into zone in a way that felt kind of weird to me. So might have been cover 2, might not have been. But there might have been miscommunication among kind of all the rotating cast that they had at corner. Again, they like promoted some guys up from the practice squad to play in the game. So I think Harrison Hand got beat for a big play by Marvin Jones. So it's not as if Stafford didn't have like a pretty good day throwing the ball, but I think that some of the defenders that you care about, aside from Anthony Harris, largely had a decent day. If Harris had held on to the pick, I think we would have been able to forgive him for the big play that he gave up. I think what was at the time Marvin Jones beat Todd Davis deep. That's kind of weird, but I think that was just Tampa 2. I know that somebody blamed Anthony Harris for that, either on Twitter or in the Zoom chat. I wouldn't be that aggressive about it, but certainly it would have been nice if he had rotated over faster. Covering Quintus Cephas, who I think ended up with a touchdown, and the rest of that Lions receiving corps, they did all right, but the Marvin Jones stuff was brutal. And again, I mean, he went up against a bunch of backups for a bunch of those big plays, but I mean, that was aside from that, Mrs. Lincoln, the pass defense was good.
I'm going to miss Matt Stafford. We have watched him for the last, I
really like him, man. I like him a lot.
I think we've watched him over the last 11 years. Because he came in 2009, I believe. Yes, 2009. Sorry, I'm looking up the stat this time, Arif. It's okay. I looked up the stat this time. Doesn't count on the bingo card yet. So he's been in the league since 2009. He's been really fun to watch. I've never like actively cheered against him. Like it's hard to be like it's hard to like cheer against Matt Stafford. And I don't know if it's just part of like the level loser like Lions situation, or if he's just like if like, he just seems like a decent person. He's always kind of had that bro look to him, but has never like had that sort of thing like super called out or like had that super like bro dumb moment or whatever. He seems like a super guy, and I've always wanted to see him on a better team.
Yeah, no, I mean, I like him a lot, which is kind of weird because I just argued against him being in the Hall of Fame. But, you know, you can like a guy and not think that they're one of like the 5 best players at his position ever, which is kind of how expansive the quarterback definition for the Hall of Fame is.
Yes.
But I mean, he's good. He's fun to watch. I thought that, you know, there's a lot of questions about whether or not he'd be able to play well once Calvin Johnson retired. He answered that spectacularly. I mean, it's not as if, you know, having that receiving core like Golladay and Jones and all that is bad. But at the same time, I think that he kind of exceeded expectations in a lot of ways. I don't know. He's just extremely likable, like you said. I mean, like, we posted the in the show notes of for the preview for this episode, we posted the video of him organizing that comeback against the Browns where he got injured his rookie year, and I mean that's like an insane peak tough guy moment. Like it's hard not to root for him. Although, yeah, I mean, as Jeremy pointed out in the pod, that was probably like malpractice from the doctors. But
ignoring
I mean, he did the same thing here, right? I mean, he wants to lead, he wants to play football, and not a ton of miscues. I mean, obviously, his wife landed in a bit of controversy recently, but you know, he himself, I mean, there's nothing I think that I can remember that I was ever kind of disappointed by him. So
no, the only real mark on him has just been a series of injuries that you could argue weren't necessarily his fault. They were the fault of either the line or fault of just, you know, getting banged up enough that kind of happened. And you know,
his rookie year he was subject to some like brutal hits behind the line of scrimmage.
And it doesn't help that for a good chunk of those early years he was, you know, being chased pretty hard by Jared Allen. Amongst other, you know, like notable Hall of Fame
and Everson Griffin.
Yeah, so it was like Jared Allen went away, and then he had to deal with Everson Griffin. You're like, really? This is the trade I get to deal with? This is crap.
Right? Yeah, Allen's gone, and oh boy. Okay, great.
My boy Orlovsky told me to worry about Jared Allen, and also to make sure of like where you're running, like, so you don't run out of things. So. Yeah, it's going to be the suspicion is that he's going to end up getting traded, or rather that he's just going to end up signing somewhere else. Rather, I believe this is the end of his contract with the Lions. So there's heavy speculation that he's going to end up somewhere else. I would be curious to see where he ends up going. I would be interested in seeing him in like a Giants uniform. That would be an interesting mix because Daniel Jones clearly isn't it. Saquon will be back next year. You got a pretty young team and a team that clearly wants to play for all 60 minutes, according to their coach.
That's right. Yeah, I think that they're actually probably still going to be committed to Daniel Jones. And I don't think Stafford's contract is up. I think it's his guaranteed money is essentially out, except for some prorated signing bonus. And I think he'll ask to be released potentially. And they might honor that request. But I mean, the Giants would be interesting. I kind of doubt that one, just because I do think the Giants are just going to commit themselves to Daniel Jones, at least for another year, because you know he showed flashes. It's always easy to like convince yourself, right? But I like if Rivers doesn't retire, which I expect he will. I like Indianapolis a lot. That seems to be the fit that a bunch of people are saying, which we talked about with the guest on the show.
That's just so boring, though. I don't know what it is, but Indy just seems.
Why is that boring?
It just seems like a boring fit because you're literally going from one veteran quarterback at the end of his career to another veteran quarterback.
It's not like they can draft a guy. They made the playoffs. What are they supposed to do?
Convince Phillip Rivers that he needs to spend less time with his kids and come back next year?
Well, you know, probably not a tough sell. But
as someone with a number of them, this conversation can be had.
But it really does feel like this is probably the last hurrah for Rivers. If it's not, obviously it opens it up. Jeremy mentioned San Francisco, which I don't know why I don't like that one, because that is a pretty spectacular fit. I think you probably have to give him one more receiver, because having Deebo Samuel there and nobody else, it just kind of sucks, especially because he's not just a yak guy, but he's probably best used that way. And while Stafford has done some pretty good stuff in the short passing game over the past couple of years when they've implemented it, you really kind of want to see him gun it intermediate and deep, and I kind of want them to get a receiver for that. So, which, I mean, obviously he's got George Kittle, but you want like a receiver that's going to get you like 1,200 yards on those. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities for him for teams that are not going to be in great range to draft a quarterback that also still need a quarterback. His market is going to be interesting. And then obviously, the Patriots, if they decide not to move forward with Cam Newton, which that's going to be a really tough evaluation, I think, because he showed some really great stuff and some really awful stuff, like really high highs and really low lows. So
Alex Smith has his potential out as well this year. And that would be interesting.
I don't think that they would just cut it. I think they would have to wait for Alex Smith, and maybe they would nudge him and be like, Alex, you got to retire, man. Because we can't cut you, obviously.
Yeah, we can't be the ones to cut you. But if you win a playoff game, that basically, is your Disney, movie moment there.
Yeah, I mean, your wife built you a Lombardi trophy already. So why don't you take that?
We'd like to roll a Stafford where we're not gonna be holding our breath every time the line collapses.
Maybe.
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, like they've got a pretty good offensive line. They've got a really phenomenal defensive line, so they've got some set up. I kind of like safety Cameron Curl, and I like Kendall Fuller there as well. And they've got Terry McLaurin, who is maybe the most underrated receiver right now in the NFL. So they've got Antonio Gibson as well. So they've got like the pieces to get things to work with Stafford. I guess Washington made the playoffs, so I guess they can't draft a quarterback. So yeah, that would be an interesting fit if they can kind of just nudge Alex Smith along and be like, hey, I don't know if you want this for yourself. It seems tough. It seems like every time you get hit, everybody has a heart attack. You want to do that to your friends, Alex?
Like even Teddy Bridgewater watches you get hurt and goes, "Ooh."
Right. He's like hesitating every time he watches you in the highlight reel. Like that's something, man.
Yeah, you've clearly won comeback of the year. Let's just end it at that. Let's get back to the Lions game for a moment. There wasn't much to really talk about. Outside of your main players playing well, Justin Jefferson ends up. The one thing I do want to mention is Justin Jefferson did in fact break the rookie receiving record. It was a nice little moment. You can tell he was really trying for it too, because every catch it seemed like he was stretching out just a little bit more than normal. Just try, especially on the one that he was being led to the outside. He's like, nope, gotta get one more yard just in case. This is the one that I need.
Right? Yeah. No, I mean, he obviously did a remarkable job. 133 yards, I want to say. Yeah, sure, why not? So that's the Super Bowl era rookie receiving record. I guess Chris Thomason keeps tweeting out like the one guy from 1960 that has more yards as a rookie. But yeah, I mean, this is functionally the rookie receiving record, right? Yeah, I mean, just what a great capper to a season. Obviously, I don't know if like you can expect to have this kind of insane efficiency at over 2.6 yards per attempt or yards per route run. Which Will Rega tweeted out is kind of nuts, because if you take a look historically over the past couple of years, the types of receivers that have done that, it's only people like Antonio Brown, Julio Jones, who did it 4 times, which is nuts. Michael Thomas has done it twice. Just players at the top of the league. It's not a very large list of players either. It's like 4 or 5 players that have done it over the past 6 years. I don't necessarily expect the 2.6 yards per route run to necessarily continue, but I do expect him to continue to be a high level, star level receiver. So putting together that rookie record, I think is one example of that, and especially once you take a look at his yards per start, I think it goes up to like 100 essentially, and his yards per game is just a little bit below that, which puts him in kind of Odell Beckham territory in terms of the way that he performed as a rookie. So, yeah, I mean, he had a great game, and it's one of those things where I think it took a while for people to acknowledge that Antonio Brown was the best receiver in the league. It took a while for people to acknowledge that Michael Thomas was a high level receiving threat. I think for these guys that primarily win through remarkable route running, sometimes it can be kind of difficult to fully appreciate what level they're at until you kind of go to the end of the season and count it up, right? Like I think that as he was developing these on pace stats, it was pretty easy to say, hey, he might be on the break of one of the best rookie seasons ever. But I feel like, and he made a Pro Bowl, so it's not as if I'm saying he's underappreciated, but I feel like it's kind of fully difficult to really grasp how good of a receiver he is right now, because even though he has his moments where he's mossing people and stuff, it's not like the same as like Julio Jones just physically dominating his competition, right? Like I think, or DeAndre Hopkins consistently doing it again and again. I think that this is going to be something where, as we kind of go forward, it's going to be difficult to compare him to other high level receivers, and he's not going to get the Michael Thomas treatment where a bunch of people slander him because it's just a bunch of 7-yard slants again and again and again. But I do think it's going to be one of those, he might end up being the best receiver in the league, but it's going to be difficult for him to lay claim to that, because I think somebody who's like more physically imposing, like AJ Brown, might just be able to kind of assert himself in the conversation, and people just kind of prefer that style of play. But I love having, this kind of discussion. Like we at the end of his rookie year, we're already having discussions about whether or not going forward, Justin Jefferson might end up being underrated, right? Like right now, I don't think he is. I think once you set a rookie record, it's kind of difficult to do that. But, is he going to get an all-pro, later on with similar performances like this? Obviously, he has to compete with, Hopkins and Adams and Jones and so on. Although Jones, is closer to the end of his career than some of these others. But yeah, I don't know. I'm excited to see where his career is going to go. But yeah, this 133 yards against the Lions, just kind of another good example. It felt like an unremarkable 133 yards, but I'm not in a great position to talk about it because of the watch along kind of distracting me the whole time. But I don't know, it was fun to watch him. And you're right, he was able to kind of just keep on reaching just outside of his frame to keep on reeling in catches.
I'd be really curious to see the difference between Stephon Diggs's running of routes versus Justin Jefferson's running of routes in 2 or 3 years. And just seeing like the maturation of the player, and just seeing, not necessarily seeing who's better, but just because like seeing the little differences between the two, because there are some very interesting similarities. Diggs is going to get you more of those circus catches where you sit there and go, how the hell did he do that? And it turns out that Justin Jefferson is going to be able to is just his style is involves eluding people, or just like eluding tackles. You sit there like, how the hell did you do that?
Yeah, and I think subtle is the wrong word. I think fluid might be the right word, where when he gets open, it's kind of like this fluid process where he appears to be open. Whereas with Diggs, a lot of times when he gets open, it's explosive. Like he gets out of his break and the cornerback is turned the wrong way 3 times, right? Or he swim moves at the stem, right at the top of the route. And like it looks like he's throwing the cornerback to the ground and he bursts out of his break. And at the end of the day, like they might have a similar amount of separation from the nearest defender, right? Just by virtue of the route running, but it just looks a lot different. And it might take a different type of skill set from different cornerbacks to approach them, right? Because when Diggs explodes out of a break, you need to have like really excellent recovery speed. I mean, Diggs is good at a lot of elements of route running, and deception is one big element to that. But if you're playing against Jefferson, it might be more important to be a headier corner than with Diggs, where you just kind of have to have that natural quickness. So yeah, I mean, it'd be kind of fun to put together, in a couple of years, just kind of comparison tape between Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, and Stephon Diggs and the way they run routes, because they probably look a lot different, and they're all really great route runners.
Yeah, it's just been fun to watch. I say fun to watch all 3 of them over the years, but even Diggs now in Buffalo has just been, you just sit there. I remember when he used to do, oh God, look at him go.
Right.
He looks like he tossed the defender outside of like Adrian Peterson would on the Cleveland Browns run where he just tossed the defender out. Like he looks like he did that to a corner without touching him. Just like how
yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just ridiculous. Okay, so we've been covering that. Obviously, Dalvin Cook was not in the game because his father had passed away, so he was a scratch for the game. This was Alexander Madison's turn to run, and you had a Kirk Cousins throw that astonished people. And if you played it, if I forget if I recorded that part of the watch along, but there was a Kirk Cousins throw that looked like a failed screen that he threw right at the defender to the point where the defender
bad astonish. Okay, yeah, I remember this now. I was like, what throw are you talking about? I don't remember one
it had pick six written all over it. And I think the only reason it didn't is because the defender was like, that was the most blatant thing I've ever seen in my life. Why would you throw that there? And on the
you can't throw it away at me. That's absurd.
Kirk Cousins disagreed. And if you watch the watch along, all of the cameras pointed at the individuals watching the game. It's Eric Thompson's computer was first, so he warned us that something terrible was coming. And then,
after the first couple of plays, props to Eric Thompson for keeping an even keel and not reacting.
Yes,
too emotionally ahead. He was just like, "Oh wow, you all are going to see something real soon." And it was like that play, and we're losing our minds after it happens. Which it's kind of like you said, it's kind of funny because it was Eric Thompson first, and then I was probably further up the list because Dusty was like a minute behind,
and Jesse was stuck on pause. Yeah,
and Jesse just didn't figure out how to unpause the stream. But yeah, I mean, we had like a cascade of reactions. Really remarkable,
just beautiful. Everyone slowly but surely, their face on the camera turned into the infinite scream painting. It was just just magical. That play hurts. It turned into nothing, but that play is everything that Kirk Cousins haters love to point at, and everything Kirk Cousins defenders just shake their heads and go, oh, "Really? That's
right." And it's one of those things where if you're the kind of person that's just like, these stats never tell the whole story. Kirk Cousins might be fifth or whatever in passer. I don't know what he is. But he might be fifth in passer rating or whatever it is. You might have over 100 passer rating, which, I mean, given the turnovers at the beginning of the year, maybe not. But, he's always going to have a play like this that doesn't always show up in the stat sheet. And maybe. He actually had a worse interception luck than most quarterbacks this year. More of his interceptable passes were caught than most quarterbacks. But so I guess he was just kind of getting one back. But I mean, that's probably a reason to argue that Cousins didn't actually have all that great of a game. And I saw a couple of people after the game say, you can't blame that one on Cousins, which, I mean, I guess if you're apportioning blame, that's true. But yeah, Cousins threw for over 400 yards. He had 3 touchdowns. He had a great game. And no, he didn't have a great game. Yeah, he had over 10 yards an attempt. That's pretty good. Obviously 3 touchdowns is not bad to have. But I mean, I feel like there were at least 2 interceptable passes there that Cousins threw that didn't end up in the box score. So it was definitely not a bad. I wouldn't say it was a bad game by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, that pick was baffling, but it was obviously was not the whole game. But it wasn't like I wouldn't put it up there as one of the good games. It was like an all right game that happened to have 400 yards in it.
One of the quieter 400 yards games you're ever going to find.
Yeah, it was a week 17 meaningless game. It's probably why.
Well, as it turns out, Kirk Cousins is great in garbage time. Also, this entire game was garbage time. So,
yeah, right. There are already jokes about him padding his stats in a meaningless game. It's just like, what's he supposed to do?
Yeah. Eric at some point had mentioned during the watch along, this is like Kirk Cousins' career record is we are going to approach it here. He's got 260 at halftime. It's like, jeez.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Like, all things are possible through Ben DiNucci. We might see a record tonight for him. So it was a real indictment of the Lions' pass defense. God rest their souls. They were not good. One thing I was kind of surprised by was that the Lions didn't just spend the entire time trying to run down the Vikings' throat. Especially after watching Alvin Kamara, like, this is your shot for a 100-yard rusher. I had Adrian Peterson at 125 yards on the bingo card for a reason. Like, anything was on the table, and they didn't take advantage.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, Adrian, I think, averaged over 8 yards a carry, something like that.
That one 40-plus yarder really tosses that average.
Well, no, so that's what I was just about to bring up. So he with that averages over 8.5, maybe 9 yards a carry. But I remember if you take that out, his yards per carry on his other 6 attempts is still like over 4.2. It's still a league average. Like, it's league average plus an explosive play. And I think that you could live with that if you're the Lions, right? DeAndre Swift was doing really well too. He had over 4 yards a carry, 4.5. And like you said, I mean, they were doing a great job kind of running down the Vikings. So I thought, the Vikings linebackers were as you'd expect Vikings linebackers to be at this stage of the season, against the run. I mean, they were just kind of awful. Eric Wilson got blown up against the run. That's who he is. It's like fundamentally, you can't really change that about him. Who's Troy Dye? I'm trying to remember. Troy died. He got blown up against the run. He also got destroyed in coverage, which is supposed to be his thing, but he did get blown up against the run. Todd Davis, I guess, was not bad against the run, where, in other games, like against Alvin Kamara, he was. And his issue is not his ability to tackle or have stopping power. It's to get the right tackling angle so that he can, effectively tackle. Like, he has a couple of missed tackles, I think, in his resume, but most of that's just because he didn't get to play pure downhill. Like, if he gets to do that, he's fine. So he was fine, but Wilson got blown up. Dye got blown up. I want to say Harrison Smith, as good as he was in coverage, got kind of turned around as a run defender as well a little bit. And the Vikings defensive line was the Vikings defensive line. I don't really need to go too much into that. They got blocked out of the water on that one. So yeah, it was. I kind of expected them to run the ball more, but when Stafford's averaging 9 yards an attempt, I guess it's. I don't know. They scored 35 points. I can't be, I guess, too critical of their offensive strategy.
Well, I mean, if they didn't score 6 running touchdowns against us, so clearly there was room for improvement.
Comparatively, I mean, that's just that's pretty abysmal.
The Vikings defense did just enough in order to make this a game where the Vikings were able to win.
Yeah, they didn't fail hard enough. Yeah, that's a good point.
There you go. That's something to hang your hat on. Jeez. Yeah, I was
actually Anthony Harris. We'll talk about this in the mailbag. Man, this is not a great game for Anthony Harris.
No, not at all. I am looking up the stat right now because that is apparently my job at the moment, since you refused to today. The Detroit rushing stat line this particular game, it was 129 total yards.
Yeah, they should have run the ball more because that can't have been on too many attempts.
No, it was not. It was on 20.
If you take out Stafford had a couple attempts, right? So if you take
Stafford had 2, and so without Stafford, you had 20 attempts on a team this bad against the run. You have 20 attempps. I'm just saying,
probably still over 120 yards. So yeah, 6 yards a carry. Woof.
I'm just saying, you probably could have done more to help your quarterback, who is hooked up to an IV, basically. You could have.
Stafford wants to play, man. He wants to play. He wants to win these games. They want to establish a winning culture. That's part of it too. When we talked to Jeremy, I said both teams are going to attempt to win the game. Kind of circumstances be damned. I guess they're not the Eagles or whatever, which we could talk about that in a second. But I really genuinely think that both teams thought it was critical to go out attempting to win this game in order to establish a winning culture. For the Vikings, they didn't try too hard, right? They didn't plead with Dalvin Cook or anything like that, which good on them, right? Like I'm glad they didn't. I'm glad that they.
I cannot imagine reporting on that. Vikings tried to convince their star running back not to attend his dead father's funeral in order to stay within COVID protocol in order to play on Sunday.
Right, yeah, exactly. Like, I'm glad that they didn't. That's not a criticism or anything like that.
No, that's a Dan Snyderism.
Rotating through Harrison Hand and Gradrea Takersley, and which I guess they didn't have Cameron Dancer, but rotating through that entire cornerback group, I think tells me that they called the game like they wanted to win it, and indeed they did win the game, but they were like pretty comfortable. Whereas the Lions were very much like, look, this organization has been in a morass ever since Jim Caldwell took them to the playoffs. So we need to make sure that we kind of refresh everything in the building and make sure we establish a winning culture, which means calling plays as if this game matters, which means having Stafford throw the ball despite not having any ribs. So
yes, that, as it turns out, is exactly what they did, and they were successful. There was that one really nice pass that he threw. Admittedly, I have to say that was Marvin Jones, but at the same time, Kirk Cousins threw a pass to Chad Beebe that the Lions defenders just assumed went incomplete, like from the look of it.
Yeah, they just kind of let it go.
Yeah, that was
right.
Pro Bowl style defense in that they didn't want to tackle. Like, it was just the most. I rewatched that before we came on, and Chad Beebe just strides in, just almost untouched, and all the Lions players like, I thought you were gonna get him. Like that was quintessential Lions to me. That was
that was a super funny, like, because we saw this, because even Justin Jefferson was like. Was supposed to be kind of blocking the way, but he kind of gave up a little bit, and
Justin Jefferson jumped out of the way and was like, I'm not getting a penalty here.
Yeah, well, yeah, and then he jumped out of the way. He's like, you know what? Yeah, you've got this.
This is Chad Beebe. Get your touchdown, man. I'm gonna get out of the way so you don't get like a block in the back, dumb call or whatever, because the refs are calling everything dumb against us this year. So I'm gonna dive out of bounds here and just hope I don't get targeting.
Here's a blasphemous comparison, which I know that you're all about.
Obviously.
So when's the last time you remember a Vikings receiver making two defenders run into each other after a catch?
The last time I remember something like that happening would have been against it happened a lot against the Packers for some reason.
And the most notable one was Randy Moss.
Yep, there was Randy Moss, and it happened to Percy Harvin a couple of times.
It did happen to Percy Harvin, although for him it felt different, right? It felt like he was manipulating like time magic energy.
Well, yes, because as it turns out, Percy Harvin was also higher than a Georgia pine.
Right? Yeah, I mean, he was accessing his powers.
Yes,
but with Randy Moss, it was just like, oh yeah, no, he just slipped past him, and in a tackle attempt, they run into each other.
Wait a second. Are you literally comparing a Randy Moss move?
That's kind of what happened here. Horseshoe theory on Chad Beebe. Now I'm a fan.
Now Chad Beebe is okay. You demand to have him re-signed for next year. That is.
What would Randy Moss go for in today's cap environment?
Oh my God.
You'd have to pay him like low end quarterback money, right? You'd like $30 million, right?
He would probably be in a situation where he'd probably be looking at like part of the team. Like he'd probably be looking at
ownership shares. Yeah.
He'd be looking at Mahomes' situation where he's like, I'm going to be able to take this money and I'm going to buy a baseball team with it. Like he has his own literal section of US Bank Stadium.
He just has it. He just has it named after him.
That actually is the Randy ratio. Yes.
No, but that BB touchdown was hilarious.
Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it did remind me of one of the touchdowns from the Thanksgiving game, where the defender was like, what's going on? Like it had that sort of look to it. So yeah, that was Chad Beebe having his Randy Moss moment. That is so dumb, but accurate, which is scary.
Which is the dumbest part, right?
Oh yes, and then Kirk Cousins goes in and does the gritty, and everyone just goes, "Oh no, it's the white guy who's had a little bit too much to drink at the wedding."
Oh God, Kirk Cousins is feeling himself. Oh no.
Like, hey, good for him. He was able to get that. He was able to get the rushing touchdown in, and then Dan Bailey being Dan Bailey this year. I have a random question, and we can kind of wrap this up here. Do you think there's going to be more new faces this year than returning, or do you think there's going to be more returning? And I'm not talking about people on the practice squad or whatever. Like, are there when we look at
among the starters, right?
Right. When we look at the 51-man roster next year, are there going to be more new faces, or do you think there's going to be more returning?
Yeah, I would say, I guess not among the starters, but yeah, among the top 51 or the 53 active. That's a good question, because I think that we'll probably see some roster churn at defensive line. We'll see some roster churn at the bottom of the cornerback group. We'll obviously see some changes along the offensive. I say obviously. We should expect some changes along the offensive line.
Blackmail still stays blackmail. We're still gonna see Dakota Dozier out there.
Yeah, he still has something on Rico Dennison.
Yep.
We'll see kind of what happens to the offensive line. I suspect that they'll attempt to replace Dakota Dozier, despite their dogged devotion to the gentleman that is Dakota Dozier.
A series of traffic cones, just something.
Yeah, I mean, so something that indicates, some kind of resistance. Like maybe you put up a sign, and a polite football player will at least hesitate, and that'll give you a little bit more time than Dakota Dozier did in kind of the final stretch of the season. So, someone who does not escort a player to the quarterback, right? Doesn't roll out a red carpet.
Yes.
So I think we'll see probably some change along the offensive line. I don't know that we'll see much in terms of changes in depth, right? Because I think that we'll still have like Oli Udoh playing backup tackle. Rashad Hill probably is going to see free agency, and he might sign somewhere. So, Oli Udoh might move up to be the primary backup at tackle. But I wouldn't be surprised if they re-signed Brett Jones, or rather cut him on cut down day and then re-sign him for week 2, like the third year in a row. I wouldn't be shocked to see that again. But, maybe another backup guard, maybe another starting guard, maybe Dakota Dozier becomes the backup guard again, which I don't like. Last year, I didn't hate Dakota Dozier as a backup, but for most of the year, I would say he played like a mid-level backup guard, which is fine to have. But as the season wore down, near the end of the season, if that's the style of play you can expect from him, you don't even want him as a backup, and the Vikings have him as a starter. So we'll see. But I think that we'll see a little bit of change along the offensive line. But I think for the most part, we'll see a lot of the same faces or returning faces. And that includes people like Michael Pierce and Eric Hendricks and Daniel Hunter. So I think we'll see a lot of people that we've become familiar with. I don't think, the bottom of the roster in some positions is going to change. We're going to see maybe a change at safety. I don't know that Josh Metellus is going to be, up to replacing Anthony Harris. I loved his camp, but, the Vikings didn't love it enough that I don't think he made the roster. I think he got cut and then had to get re-signed or something along those lines. I think we'll see, a change at safety of some sort. We'll see a change at the bottom of the cornerback group. But for the most part, we'll see a lot of the same faces. We'll see maybe a new defensive tackle, a new guard, maybe, a new receiver to challenge for the wide receiver 3 spot. But for the most part, a lot of the same faces. Maybe no Tajay Sharp, but a lot of the same faces.
A lot of the same faces, and hopefully Chad Beebe for you now that you've decided he's worth sticking around.
Nah, the bit's over, man. He's got to go. Oh, okay, he's a fine wide receiver 5, but wide receiver 3, Jesus.
Yeah, it's not ideal to be going into a situation with that, but you go to war with the troops you have, apparently.
Right, yeah.
As we have referenced for now what has to be the 40th time in the show's history. So the big news that's come out this week, or rather today even, is that it appears that Gary Kubiak is going to retire. The Vikings are preparing to move on without him, and this makes it 6-for-6 for the Vikings and their offensive coordinators. Let's do a brief history of the Vikings and offensive coordinators, because it just seems like this is in fact a revolving door.
Yeah, so Zimmer originally hired Norv Turner back in 2014, which I think a lot of people thought was a really great get. I was one of them. And then they were able to stay with Turner from 2014 to 2015, and then 2015 to 2016. But 5 games into the season, after going 5-0, Norv Turner resigned during the season, and you ask a bunch of people, and they'll say that it was a genuine resignation and that Zimmer didn't want him to resign, and I find that really fascinating. But I thought it was probably the right thing. I thought it was the right decision for the Vikings for Turner to kind of leave.
A lot of really odd, flowery comments were coming out of the Zimmer camp at that point. Stuff you don't hear coming out of the mouth of Mike Zimmer. You hear a lot of expletives. You don't hear a lot of he's my brother. I really, I love the guy. I don't want him to go. There was a lot of flowery language coming out of the coaching staff at that point.
Yeah, and so it very much seems like Turner was not pressured to resign, which is just baffling to me, honestly, because the offense was doing so poorly. Yeah, the Vikings were 5-0, but that was a product of being able to score a bunch on defense, which didn't sustain itself, and the Vikings ended up collapsing that year, not making the playoffs. But then Pat Shurmur takes over. The offense gets better. They still don't win. Pat Shurmur takes over. He continues to be the offense coordinator for 2017. That's the Case Keenum season. A lot of people we're excited about Shurmur as a potential head coach candidate after, you don't want to judge him too harshly for having been with the Browns. So the Giants hire him away in 2017. So the Vikings bring in John DeFilippo in 2018, who is both the quarterback's coach and essentially the red zone coordinator for the Eagles in their Super Bowl run, where Carson Wentz was, in theory, putting together an MVP season. DeFilippo was able to adapt from calling plays successfully for Carson Wentz to calling plays successfully for Nick Foles, both equally limited quarterbacks. So that's a pretty great resume to have. And so he was brought in, and then he was fired during the season with about 3 games left to go. I think it was after the Seattle game he got fired. And I don't know who took over play calling. No, it was Kevin Stefanski. Kevin Stefanski took over play calling duties for the final 2 or 3 games for 2018. And then he turned from interim to in-name offensive coordinator for 2019, puts together a good enough season to get hired as the Browns head coach. And the Browns were already interested in him, I think, a season before. But I guess didn't move on that. And so from 2019 to 2020, they moved to Gary Kubiak. So 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, the beginning of each of those seasons is a different offensive coordinator: Turner, Shurmur, DeFilippo, Stefanski, and Kubiak. Notably, only one of those was actually removed for underperformance, right? I would say we can count Turner as kind of, underperforming and then removed. So only 2 of those 5 were ever at a point where it made sense to get rid of them because of how poorly the offense was doing relative to expectations. But 2 of them got hired as head coaches because of how good they were. And one of them is retiring probably. Again, we don't know for a fact that he's retiring, but the Vikings are, per sources, according to Chad Graff and a number of other reporters like Ben Gessling, are preparing for 2021 as if Kubiak is retiring. The offense wasn't bad, at least from a design perspective. I had a bunch of issues with play calling that I detailed in my most recent piece at The Athletic, at least my most recent Vikings piece at The Athletic. But the offense wasn't bad. It performed well, and obviously it wasn't the issue for why the Vikings went 7-9. And so he's retiring primarily for health reasons. So the Vikings have been going through offensive coordinators. Zimmer is carrying this offensive coordinator killer baggage around his neck, but at the same time, 3 of these 5 guys were not bad. They were pretty good. 2 of them were good enough to become head coaches, even though one of them had already been a demonstrably bad head coach. That's how good that offense was. So, yeah, it's tough. But, yeah, the Vikings are going to have their 6th coordinator in 6 years. We'll see if it's another Kubiak. There's a bunch of mailbag questions, so I'll leave that for the mailbag because they frame questions, and I think in a way that fleshes this out a little bit better than if I just kind of went off the cuff. But yeah, that seems to be kind of the nature of the beast at offensive coordinator.
Yeah, John DeFilippo is the one that I couldn't remember there for some reason, and he was hired away by Jacksonville. He was ended up hired in Jacksonville, and then had a grand opening, grand closing. I don't even think he made it a year.
Yeah, I don't think that he finished out the year at Jacksonville, but I think it's. Yeah, so he and then he got hired by Chicago. So he's currently the Chicago Bears quarterbacks coach. But yeah, he was a rising star, and that got cut out from underneath him.
Yep.
I say that as if like he didn't play a role in having that taken out from underneath his feet. But yeah, I mean, he also did not do well enough to continue that reputation.
Yes, I think that is. I think that's very accurate. So it looks like the Vikings are going to end up looking at a new offensive coordinator. We'll answer more questions about that in the mailbag as well. This is a year that the Vikings are going into that there is an absolute lack of cap, and this is going to be interesting to see how the Vikings are able to figure out re-signings or restructurings.
Yeah, so San Francisco 49ers general manager John Lynch said that he is preparing for the season as if there's going to be $175 million in cap space, which I believe over the cap is not. I think over the cap is at $180 million in their projection. But either way, that is obviously significantly less than the 100 or 200 million or so in cap space that existed for 2020. So 2021, I think a lot of people were somewhat optimistic that you'd end up with 195 million in cap space. But now we're at a point where with carryover, maybe the Vikings are at 180. But yeah, I think a lot of teams are, at least if John Lynch's representative, are thinking about the cap as if it's $175 million. And if that's the case, the Vikings are obviously in a lot of trouble. They are not in the most amount of trouble compared to a bunch of other teams. They've got so the Chiefs, Texans, Rams, Packers, Steelers, Falcons, Eagles, and of course the Saints are significantly over their cap considerations for next year. And for the Vikings, that cap consideration is spread out over a large number of players that they've got under contract through 2021 at least. So they've got 47 players that are signed through 2021 and $8 million over that projected cap. That obviously is not ideal, but it's a little bit better than, say, the Falcons situation, where they're 24 million over the cap and they've got 31 players signed. So they're not in a spot where it's easy to shed some of these contracts. They've got fewer available contracts to get rid of in order to meet their cap obligations. And then obviously the Saints are in this weird spot. But I mean, both the Eagles and the Saints, those are both impacted by quarterbacks who might be about to retire or get moved on, or they might move on from in a way that could potentially help them cap wise. So that's a little bit different. But and I don't know what's going to go on with the Chiefs. They've got $5 million of less cap space and only 36 players signed through the season. We'll see. I kind of like the rookie group, so they might be able to kind of bear that out. But yeah, there's a lot of these players and a lot of these teams that are in really rough cap situations. Packers, I expect, will just extend Aaron Rodgers and reduce his cap hit. Steelers, Ben Roethlisberger might retire. So there's some areas where other teams are not necessarily as bad or worse off relative to the Vikings, but I mean, it's not great. I mean, the Bears are over cap by about $100,000 too. So that's something to consider when they make a decision on Trubisky. So yeah, the Vikings are not in a good cap spot. They're going to have to move some contracts or get rid of some guys. We'll see who they are. I mean, I think everyone is kind of already saying goodbye to Kyle Rudolph, which is going to be tough given how important the community is. But we saw how well Tyler Conklin's playing, and obviously people are really high on Irv Smith. So it doesn't really make sense to carry his like $9.5 million cap hit. Same with Riley Reif. I thought he put together maybe the best year of his career, but he's a $14 million cap hit. We'll see how that goes. The Vikings might try to convert Eric Kendricks again, which, I don't know how happy you'll be about that, but he's at 12.5. Maybe you could get him down to 10, which is what his contract average is. But then you have to make some room, right? Because you have to make some room for Danielle Hunter, who might demand more money. The good thing about that, though, is if you restructure, you might be able to get his cap hit all the way down to like $7 million and push that forward into the future. And I don't think you're too worried about that in terms of guaranteed money, because you kind of just expect him to be the franchise for a long time. But you have to have a conversation about whether or not you want to trade Harrison Smith, who's got a $10 million cap hit. Whether or not you want to maybe reduce Thielen's cap hit. It's at $13.5 million by extending him at like 31 years of age. Anthony Barr is $15 million. He's a good linebacker, but he's not $15 million good. So do you move his contract? I don't know. If you move his contract, that saves about $7.5 million. So that's going to be a tough set of conversations. But in order to get under the cap, they have to make some pretty difficult moves. It's not as bad as some other teams, but it's in the bottom third for sure.
Yeah, this is going to be rough. This is going to be interesting, and it would be kind of there's some odd numbers going on, and as you mentioned, the Saints are always in the middle of this. The Saints and whatever cap logic they use are always in the middle of this whole like how are they going to survive thing. With Breeze going away, likely would be the smart thing to do. Man, that's an interesting spot for anyone to potentially, oh wait, they overpaid a tight end as a quarterback.
Yeah.
That's what they're going to do. Oh, I was going to say that could be an interesting location for somebody. Nope. Absolutely not. They appear to have made their bed and will proceed to lie in it. Let's head over to the mailbag. We got some more post-mortem stuff for the season in here. Let's go to Alex Johnson Fry, who asks, how far away are we from our season expectations going in?
I mean, obviously the season ended like boring and stupid, so like you can't be happy with it.
And the Vikings, if the Vikings were to win that one game against the Bears, or not choke against the Falcons, or stop Seattle on that one play, they would have ended up making the playoffs. Like that's how this would have ended up going. So just
right, yeah, ugh. Yeah, and you can make the argument the other way, right? The Vikings, were in a bunch of close games, but yeah, I think that a couple plays bounced the right way for them. They end up potentially in the playoffs, right? Like if they get their stuff together against the Bears, like that's it. They're potentially playoff bound. I don't think that. So I had at the beginning of the season had said that there was a wide range of potential outcomes. And I don't know if I said I could see anywhere between 6-10 and 9-7 or something like that. I feel like I said something like that. And all of that would make sense to me. I would say that this is within that range of potential outcomes. At first, I thought that the Vikings were below expectations, and then, of course, they rattled off a couple of wins in a row and kind of revived their season. I think in the end, if those wins and losses had not been as streaky, if they had been kind of distributed randomly instead of just having all the wins in the middle, then I feel like this would have felt like the way the season was going to go. Like I feel like it also kind of depends on when you're asking, right? Like if you ask after, Danielle Hunter gets, raises alarm bells by not, practicing for like 3 consecutive weeks, that might change your answer a little bit more, right? But I think for the most part, given all that roster turnover on defense, I think it was comfortable to say that the Vikings were not going to be as good this year, especially because you didn't expect Jefferson to play this well, and so you would have expected a downgrade in offensive passing performance as well. Downgrade on offense, downgrade on defense. I think it would have made a lot of sense to say 7-9. So I don't know that they were actually that far away from expectations, but I think the fact that they got close is what hurts.
Yeah, right around the time that the Vikings started rattling off a couple of wins, I believe my thought was that this was going to be an 8-8 team. That something felt unsustainable. Like they were winning games, they were playing well, but there's no way that a team just clicks like this. Not in Minnesota. This isn't something that happens. So it's looking something like an 8-8 team. So especially after week 2 or 3, we're just like, wow, the Vikings are getting destroyed out here. And all of a sudden they start putting together wins. Like, yeah, but I remember the beginning of the year, and this doesn't look right. There has to be some sort of a market correction here. So yeah. This is about what most of us would have expected halfway through. Is like whether or not they made the playoff was kind of irrelevant. What was more relevant was like if they were going to like be an 8-8 team, 7-9, or 9-7, or if they were going to be sitting up and complaining that a team didn't try hard on Sunday night. Actually, I don't know if anyone really planned that, but also, who was the most surprising and the most disappointing?
Most surprising, I think, very easily is Justin Jefferson. The most disappointing, Anthony Harris is potentially on that list.
Considering how far he dropped from performance last year.
necessarily be like an all-pro safety, but he was so good over the past couple of years. And again, we'll talk about that in a bit. But yeah, I wouldn't say that like Dakota Dozier, for example, was like disappointing, right? Because I think we expected him to like just not be good, right? I wouldn't say Odenigbo was like disappointing. I thought that he played like a low end starter, which he did. So yeah, I guess yeah, I didn't expect Jalil Johnson to play well. If Holton Hill had played more, he'd probably be a good candidate for this. And hey, he got cut anyway, so like after he healed, so maybe you could put him on the list as the most disappointing. But yeah, I mean, Dancer exceeded expectations. Gladney, I think, exceeded expectations, at least in the context of like how you expect rookie corners to perform in a Zimmer system. Eric Wilson was disappointing. The 4 games we had Mike Hughes, he was disappointing. But I would say probably the most disappointing in terms of original expectations is probably Anthony Harris. And the biggest surprise is Justin Jefferson. And I think you've got a couple of good surprises in there, right? Because you've also got Cameron Dancer. You've also got Jeff Gladney. Yeah, I mean, I think Hercules Mata'afa, I would consider like he's playing well above undrafted free agent levels at this point. So he's kind of a pleasant surprise. But yeah. Oh, and I guess Unique Ngakoue, but are we not allowed to use that?
No, we are not, because I'm not putting another episode title with his name in it. Kyle Slaby asks, did Zimmer use 2020 as a, quote, teachable moment for his rookie cornerbacks by giving them a proverbial can opener of coverage assignments and hope they figured it out on their own? Can opener dad.
Yeah. Zimmer definitely bean dadded the Vikings cornerbacks. Yeah, I mean, he kind of did just throw him into the fire and say, figure it out. I mean, it's probably a little bit different than like throwing a starving 9-year-old a can opener and just telling her to intuit how it works. But it's, because you probably kind of went over stuff, but like he did put too much on their plate too early. And he essentially acknowledged that a couple of games into the season, which I've talked about this on the podcast before, but it's like, man, that was pretty predictable, dude. like 3 of them left, and you've had like an insane amount of continuity in that back end. So that was pretty predictable. But yeah, it was a very complex scheme that they ended up having to simplify in order to make it kind of work for those young guys. That simplification ended up working, and then after you lose Eric Kendricks, you ended up kind of losing a lot of what was happening at the middle of the defense that was helping you out. So it kind of fell back apart, but. Yeah, I think that they put way too much on the cornerback's plates. I don't know that he threw him a can opener and just kind of let him be while he was figuring out his puzzle, but I think that he didn't do a great job of kind of figuring out kind of what cognitive load they'd be able to take this early in their careers.
Yeah. Also from Kyle Slaby, can we get an evaluation on Arif's ability to start fights in the last year? And what areas are you looking to improve on in 2021 on Twitter?
Over the last year, I'd say that I did a decent, not great job of starting fights. I think I've had better years in terms of fighting. I fought my way on to Philadelphia Drive Time Radio. So that was a couple years ago, 2018. 2018? Might have been 2019. It was 2019 because he was recovering from injury. Carson Wentz was. I mean, that's pretty high level play. I don't know if I can hit. I don't know if I hit that last year or this last year in 2020. But I think I did a pretty good job. I wouldn't say I was above expectation, but I wouldn't say I was significantly below it. And in terms of areas to improve, I think that I need to make sure that I don't always keep on falling back on old tropes, which is, I don't regret, pointing out that Cordell Patterson is the best kick returner in Bears history or anything like that. That's fun, but that can't be my only source of starting new fights. Like I can't just go back into the Mitch Trubisky well. It's going to be difficult because for half the year, I'm not going to know which team Trey Lance is playing for. So we'll see kind of what fights I can start with regards to that. I was able to get into a bunch of Carson Wentz fights his rookie year before he was drafted. So that is always possible. I was fighting with Bison Nation and the Twitter account bisonnation.info, as well as Bison Nation, the group of people. So it is possible, but I think I'm going to get into more fights as soon as Trey Lance gets drafted somewhere. So that's going to be fun. But yeah, I need to find more original sources of conflict to create some of these fights. So we'll see how that goes. But I think for the most part, I think I did a pretty reasonable job this year. If I was given a contract for how well I started fights, I wouldn't say I lived up to that contract. But neither was I in a position where where I think anyone would regret it signing me to that contract either.
Just slightly playing slightly below contract.
Yeah, just a little bit. Yeah, for sure.
Anton asks, was Zimmer deliberately asking a bit too much of Anthony Harris to slightly lower his asking price? Or the actual question, how do the Vikings retain him?
I don't I don't think that Zimmer made Anthony Harris play worse in order to make him cheaper. I think that Zimmer wanted to win a couple of games and couldn't. No, how do the Vikings retain him? I guess after a year like that, it is a little bit easier. But I think he's gone unless they trade Harrison Smith, which, I don't know what the locker room dynamic is. I don't know how important he is to calling the defense. Obviously you get some sense that he's remarkably important and that he's pretty critical to making sure that everyone is kind of aligned correctly and stuff like that. And so kind of the degree to how important that is matters here, because you can't just say Anthony Harris is going to do it. And what do you do when Eric Hendricks gets injured? Who else is going to kind of captain the defense? But I would say that from a pure individual assignment perspective, going forward, despite the fact that Anthony Harris had a worse year than Harrison Smith by a fairly big margin, I would say that it is probably better to try and trade Harrison Smith, get a couple of picks back, and then sign Anthony Harris using that extra cap space. Plus, he's going to cost less than the cap space that Harrison Smith took up. But that's tough because you don't know the kind of contribution that Harrison Smith brings to the defense that are not what comes in his individual assignment. So that is a tough one, and I'm willing to accept that that his value to the defense is such that even beyond kind of those individual assignments, that would not be wise. But I think it's something that the Vikings should consider. Otherwise, I don't think they find a way to retain Anthony Harris. I think that is lost, and I think that they can look forward to what would have been a third-round compensatory pick next year, but I guess is going to be maybe a fourth or fifth-round compensatory pick in 2022.
Kenneth Allen asks, what's the deal with Anthony Harris? He went from PFF darling to seemingly consensus bad play of the last few weeks. Is he being asked to do too much with the cornerback lack of depth, or is he just on his way out and done with the Vikings? Basically, does he need a change of scenery?
I don't know that he needs a change of scenery. It certainly feels like he's going to get that. I would say that, he was a really good cover 4 safety, and he wasn't a bad cover 3 safety either. I mean, obviously he was performing well in that scheme as well, but he was really great at kind of doing stuff like nailing the crossers and kind of using his vision that he had on the quarterback, plus his distance to the line of scrimmage and the various receivers to make sure that he could kind of continue to make a bunch of big plays. So that was a really great scheme for him. The cover 2 stuff was a little bit more difficult. He had to cover a wider range of stuff. He had to make sure that the assignment pass-offs were a little bit different. Like, I think passing off an assignment to someone that's next to you is a little bit different, or picking up an assignment from someone that's next to you is a little bit different than passing off or picking up an assignment from someone who is closer to the line of scrimmage. It's just kind of a different transition in the way that you have to deal with that. And you have to just kind of be aware of kind of more things going on. Like, as Zimmer reduced the responsibility on the cornerbacks, he added responsibility onto the safeties. And I think that's kind of what went wrong with Anthony Harris this year. Plus, I mean, he just kind of took a couple of false steps. I mean, safety is a position where a couple of bad plays are probably just going to kind of define the player that you are, at least to the public at large, because it's kind of like, it's like an offensive lineman that only gets like 40 reps a year, right? And if you're a great offensive lineman, but that year you allow a sack, well, I mean, that's it. That's who you are, right? And people are going to talk about the down year you have. And so for Anthony Harris, he had a couple of bad plays that probably play into this. So it's a combination of factors. I don't think that he's fundamentally a bad player or anything like that. I think that the increased responsibilities and the change in the scheme and just a couple of mistakes here and there all kind of add up to this consensus of bad play.
Next question is from Sean, who asks, what the hell do we do about the turnstile that is the Vikings offensive coordinator? Who do you guys think would be the best options?
Yeah, I don't know that I have an answer to the best option. So Chad wrote a piece about potential options that the Vikings could look at. Most of them are within the Shanahan Kubiak tree or style of offensive coordinating coaching, which is fine. So I think that the goal here for the Vikings in this regard, if they go after kind of a Shanahan guy or a Kubiak guy, is to maintain continuity, right? I don't think that it's necessarily the case that one system is better or worse than another, and it's kind of easy to make a little bit too much of that. But we see West Coast systems. Obviously, they've done really well over the past couple of years. McVay was lighting the world on fire in 2018, not so much anymore. But Shanahan's doing really well with the just frankly crappy pieces he has in San Francisco. But we're seeing Earhart Perkins offenses do really well as well, like with Tom Brady, the Patriots, and Bruce Arians, which is also the offense that Belichick had Tom Brady run with Josh McDaniels back in New England, right? So like that language, the Tom Moore, Bruce Arians style offense that gives you that kind of language. It can look different from coordinator to coordinator, but that's the language that you have. And then obviously you've got the Air Coryell stuff, which Sean Payton is running, right? So Sean Payton's still doing West Coast stuff, which is what Joe Brady is doing in Carolina. But one of the candidates on this list is Ernie Zampese's son, I think, Ken Zampese, who is a Air Coryell style coordinator. Some of those offenses look pretty good. So I don't think it's the style of offense that matters. It's the flexibility and adaptability and intelligence of the offensive coordinator, and not the language that they use. The goal for hiring a guy is to make sure that you've got that continuity and make sure that you don't have to learn as much stuff on the fly, so you can get that offense going right away, because the Vikings probably think that they're in a window. And if the guy is smart enough, it wouldn't matter. So you can get Clint Kubiak, who I think is kind of the leader in the clubhouse. And by that, I mean, that's just kind of the assumption. I don't know if there's any reporting that indicates that he's any good. I'm kind of curious, right? Because he's not going to necessarily be his father, right? The concern is, of course, that he was hired, right? That because he's Gary Kubiak's son, but he spent time away from Kubiak and he's been hired in those systems, and maybe he's done well there. But yeah, I don't know. I just can't tell you who a good offensive coordinator is going to be. Jay Gruden is kind of interesting. I know that people didn't like him as a head coach, but I thought as an offensive coordinator, he was fine. The article mentions Hugh Jackson, which, I mean, after his head coaching debacles, I think a lot of people want to stay away from. But that 2015 season he put together with Andy Dalton is just incredible. He did a really good job as an offensive coordinator there. So there are a couple of options in the West Coast tree. We'll see. I don't know that I've got an answer for who the best offensive coordinator is going to be, because you want somebody that understands like offensive concepts and demonstrates an ability to continue adapting to the state of the NFL, the state of the players that you have, and calls a good game. Not necessarily somebody who's got the hottest system, because the system isn't really what makes the whole thing go long term. Like the system might work for you for a couple of years, like it did with Sean McVay, but for the most part, you want somebody that's going to continue to have answers. So I don't know who that guy is. Most of those guys have already been hired, right? Like we find out usually after the fact.
Zimmer does like to have old pros around him for various reasons. I could see that being the excuse for bringing in the former Cincinnati coach.
Like, yeah, I mean, either former, right? Because a guy either be Jay Gruden or Jackson, yeah. And Jay Gruden obviously has experience working with Kirk Cousins. Zimmer loves having those guys. I don't know if that's necessarily wise. It does one good year for Hugh Jackson like really qualify. Like that sounds more like the stuff I was saying that you don't necessarily want, not necessarily the stuff that persists from year to year. I think Hugh Jackson was calling plays right in Cleveland, and that was going really poorly. And that I think was his only great season, right? Because he was also the offensive coordinator 2014 for Cincinnati, and that was it was like above average, right? It was like I think Tyler Eifert got hurt that season, but you had Andy Dalton and AJ Green, and it was fine, right? He was the offensive coordinator for Oakland in 2010. That went, I think, above expectation, but he also has a bunch of years as an offensive coordinator that did not go like really remarkably well, like 2011 in Oakland, or all the times he was calling plays in Cleveland, right? Like, so I don't know that fulfills that criteria. I just kind of wanted to put out there that it's going to be tough to try and determine like what a good offensive coordinator candidate looks like.
Well,
and it might look like Stefanski, right? Like somebody who has no history of offensive coordinating, and you just kind of have to take it on faith that he might be good at it, and he was.
Yeah, there's a lot of turnover this year. There's a lot of open spots, whether it be GM, head coach, and offensive coordinator. So this
you could get Adam Gase.
Yes, we could make Luke Braun happy for once in his life and get Adam Gase over there.
Fill that meme.
Ugh. Also, let's go to Nick, who asks, with the news coming today that Kubiak is potentially retiring, would Zimmer hire the younger Kubiak or bring someone else in that would be an young offensive mind, or someone that Zimmer can impose his will on?
So I don't think Zimmer finds coaches that he can pressure. I don't think that's a criteria that he uses.
That's kind of the opposite, actually, especially when he brings in
when you
pros.
bring Turner and Kubiak and Shermer. Those don't strike me as guys that you can pressure. Yeah, I agree. And I don't think that, like, he brought in DiFilippo because he thought he could pressure the guy. I mean, clearly he couldn't, right? DiFilippo was just committed to throwing the ball 2 yards past the line of scrimmage, helping nobody. But I don't know that that's the idea. And if Clint Kubiak ends up getting promoted, I don't think that would be within the decision calculus or the decision tree that Zimmer's using. But I think that if he finds that he can put pressure on an offensive coordinator to maybe call a more run-heavy game, I think he'll try to. The only reason that it became a storyline with DiFilippo is because DiFilippo was bad at coordinating an offense. Like, if they were winning games and scoring a bunch of points and they were throwing the ball a bunch, I don't know that Zimmer would be pressuring DiFilippo all that much, right? Like, I think DiFilippo, would have had a good 2 years in Minnesota, then been hired as a head coach somewhere. I think it's, I think the primary thing is whether or not you're good or bad, and if you're bad, it's a little bit easier to feel the pressure of Zimmer. So I don't know that he'll turn to anybody specifically so that he can pressure them in one way or the other.
I think this is the last of the offensive coordinator questions here. Let's go to Duke's Code, who asks, you were asked by Rick Spielman to hire Kubiak's replacement, but could only interview someone who had coached Kirk in the past, either as play callers or QB coaches. Who would you go for? Obviously, it can't be a coach like Shanahan that isn't available.
Right. So it also means that we can't pick Kevin Stefanski, unfortunately. So that one's tough, right? Because going through Kirk's quarterback coaches and offensive coordinators, most of them are currently offensive coordinators or head coaches, right? Like, you can't pick Sean McVay, right? I don't think Matt Kavanaugh is hired anywhere right now. Like, he was the quarterbacks coach for Kirk Cousins in Washington for a little bit, and then became the offense coordinator in 2017. So that's a possibility within that framework. It looks like he's not hired anywhere. I don't he doesn't strike me as somebody that's like super exciting. Jay Gruden, I guess, is not anywhere, and that might be your two options. So I did expand this a little bit. Anybody who's worked on the offensive side of the ball with Kirk, and I went with Bill Callahan, who's currently the offensive line coach at with the Cleveland Browns, and they've got they've had one of the best turnarounds along the offensive line that I've seen. He did a really remarkable job, but I guess Jay Gruden is still with Jacksonville, right? He might get fired in Jacksonville. We'll see. But yeah. So I'll go with Bill Callahan, knowing that he was not the offensive coordinator, but rather the offensive line coach there. So, and he was an assistant head coach, I think, for a hot second with Washington. But he's got a pretty good history as an offensive coordinator. Not obviously great, otherwise he'd be one right now, given kind of his pedigree. But he's got a pretty good history as an offensive coordinator. He at least knows how to identify good offensive linemen. He just did a remarkable job with that with the Cleveland Browns, which is an area of need for the Vikings. He hasn't done too much offensive coordinating in the NFL very recently, but he's got kind of a whole West Coast system named after him that has kind of traveled around both the NFL and in college. So I'm going to pick him.
I said that was our last offensive coordinator one. I think this one actually is. Andrew Shad asks, what is the feasibility of replacing the offensive coordinator position with dice for in-game play calling? Pros, guaranteed to stay longer than one season. Less predictable play calling. Guaranteed higher pass rate on second down. Also cheaper. Cons, none.
Yeah, I mean, when you lay it out like that, inarguable.
Hey, you got to save money this time. This year you got to save some money somewhere. Would it be like a 20-sided die? Like, how would you do this?
I think it's a set of kind of specialized dice. So probably like 3 6-sided dice that instead of like numbers on them, you just got like little words on them, right? So like one of the dice,
like the fuzzy like love dice. Is that what you're saying?
No. I mean they'd be normal dice. They just have words instead of numbers on them. And so like one of them has the protection, one of them has the run call, one of them has whether or not it's play action. Maybe a fourth one that actually gives you the routes that you're going to run. But yeah, you just have them with a bunch of different words on them. You throw them and then you call that play and then hope the quarterback can kind of make sense of what you just did.
Like, hold on a second. It's going to take us like 15 seconds every time to get the play call into you. It'll be like just before the mic shuts off. But we're saving money here. And oddly enough, we're being more successful this way than we were before. Ryan asks a fine question. He says, I feel like if there's anything to glean from the clip shows is that Norse Code listenership has excelled in applying passive aggression to our daily interactions in 2020. Given this high output, where can we go from here? Can James give us a pump-up speech to start 2021 off strong?
You have the floor, James.
I believe in the principle of passive aggression. I believe that we can do something spectacular here. 2020 was a good year. There were a number of fantastic qualities. There were a number of fantastic performances out there. Ones that I'll list off the top of my head include the remaking of dishes right after your significant other makes them. That truly fantastic. Appreciated that. We had someone go out there that was that had managed to the reveal kind of ruined his relationship, I feel. But he went out there and was talking. He had made some little joke with his fiance, or I believe wife, about every time she coughed, he said, bless you to them. Just little things to get you through a relationship. I am proud of the efforts that have been put out there over the past year by Norse Code listeners. Now we need to step it up. These are rookie numbers. You got to get these numbers up. You got to be, and you know what? I'm trying to lead by example. I am full of passive aggression, as Arif can attest to. I am trying to lead by example for my Norse Code passive aggressive troops. We can, in fact, do better. We will, in fact, do better. And I look forward to reading all of your tales of passive aggression on our spin-off podcast that'll end up being Patreon only, because I don't want to deal with the iTunes or the lawsuits that come from that.
So I'll just add this. Look at how you did this year in being passive aggressive. Is that the best you can do? If it is, that's fine. That's it. I'm done.
Is it your career year? Really? Would you pay someone your salary to do this? No. You can do better. Again, these are rookie numbers.
If you're happy with your output this year, okay. That's okay. But maybe we could consider whether or not there's a little bit more room to get a couple more things done here. But hey, your circumstances better than I do. If this is the best that you can do, that's up to you. You should feel good about yourself for how well you performed. But maybe just kind of take a look at kind of how others are doing around you.
I love how you're negging people into being more passive aggressive. This is the sort of work I'm pointing at right now. This is the sort of thing that you can be doing. You can achieve so much more through just yourself and your own selfishness. And yeah. Also from Ryan, given the roster currently signed for 2021 right now, if you could solve one roster hole this offseason for the next 5 years, what would it be? Defensive tackle, guard, safety, edge 2, wide receiver 3, cornerback 2. I'm going to throw kicker in here too.
Okay, so I don't know that CB2 is a roster hole, right? So I think that would be the most valuable one if it was a roster hole for me to just say, hey, that one's solved for the next 5 years. Let's go. I'll roll the dice on that one. And then the rest, some of this is just going to be kind of answered by the way that we talk about the draft. But I think that kind of, what's more valuable, a starting defensive tackle versus a wide receiver 3 that's only going to see the field, however so often, depending on who the offensive coordinator is, an edge defender, whatever. I would say I would solve the edge defender hole, right? So like safety, that's going to be a hole, and that is probably a more important position. But I think that if you can kind of just get the actually, no, that's dumb. I'm dumb. Let me change my mind again. I think the Vikings can do a pretty good job of solving the edge defender problem themselves, so I'll leave them up to it. The issue is I don't know if I trust the Vikings necessarily at defensive tackle. They've tried a bunch of solutions there that don't work. I don't know if I trust the Vikings necessarily at safety, and I don't know if I definitely don't trust them at guard. So I'm going to say safety. That's a very important position. I think that the Vikings can solve edge defender without divine intervention. I think wide receiver 3 is a little bit less important. I think cornerback 2 might already be solved. I think guard is just not that critical. And I think defensive tackle, though important, has a higher likelihood of being solved than safety. That one I think is tough. So I'm going to go with safety, knowing that it would have been really nice to have a premier edge defender to put next to Danielle Hunter, something the Vikings clearly agree with.
What if you were able to solve kicker for the next 5 years?
I mean, that would feel better. I don't know if that would actually lead to more wins.
Sometimes it's what matters in your heart as opposed to what's going on the score sheet, Arif. That's something that gets lost in the whole analytics thing.
Oh, yeah. Do I get paid more if the Vikings miss the playoffs, but my heart feels better?
Yeah, because maybe you ended up getting more subscriptions.
That's not how it works.
You get paid off of subscriptions. You don't get paid if, whatever.
Yeah, and people subscribe more if the team is good. If they go to that Super Bowl, my subscriptions go through the roof. So,
but if we have a kicker,
let's get the best Vikings team possible.
If we have a kicker who's nailing 62 yarders all the time, I'm just saying.
I mean, this forces us to ask what it means to solve a roster hole, because if you just get like the best player at their position for the next 5 years, I would go with wide receiver 3, because now you've got essentially CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. You'd be crazy not to go into 11 personnel.
Yes, but do kickers on the whole do score a ridiculous number of points on a season?
Yeah, but the difference between a replacement level kicker and the best kicker in terms of total points scored is not as big as the difference between an awful wide receiver 3 and the best wide receiver 3.
I'm trying to end a drought and what's possibly a baby witch curse here.
I am trying to preserve the soul of the team and win at the same time, and that's hard. Do you understand that? Do you understand how hard this is for me?
Just let me get my kicker. Skull Vikings asks, why would drafting Devonta Smith, wide receiver, instead of Wyatt Davis, guard, likely lead to more wins next year and more wins over the next decade, given the current makeup of the Vikings roster?
So the gap between a high-level receiver and like Chad Beebe is probably smaller than the gap between a high-level guard and Dakota Dozier. So I kind of get this, but quarterbacks can do a better job controlling the pressure production of their offensive line than they can of the receiving capability of the wide receivers. And I think seeing some good quarterbacks kind of struggle with some iffy wide receivers, I think we've seen some evidence of that this year. I would say that a wide receiver is more likely to elevate play than a guard is, right? So I think that if you've got remarkably good 11 personnel, which is what I was just talking about, you can mitigate that pressure too, because you're always going to have someone open a little bit early anyway. And so if pressure comes, you can just throw it really quickly to Devonta Smith, who has just amazing after catch ability, apparently. I have not watched much college football, but I have seen Twitter highlights, and that dude can scoot. So, yeah, you've probably got some pretty good after catch capability that would turn your hot routes and your answers to blitzes into just some serious offensive weaponry. So, you can relieve pressure just by having better receivers, which is in fact how the Packers manage it a lot too. Like Aaron Rodgers prefers to have more receivers running routes so that he can kind of distribute the ball under pressure or before pressure even arrives, rather than have someone pass protect, because you're essentially just introducing more elements of failure instead of having another safety valve. So, yeah, I think it probably makes more sense to have Devonta Smith. I think if you're faced with that decision, and those are the only two players that make sense to draft at like 14, man, that is an insanely good draft. Holy crap. B, you probably get quite a bit from trading down and grabbing some more, because if Devonta Smith is, I guess in this scenario, what Jamar Chase is probably already drafted. I don't know who the better receiver is, but a lot of people think that one of them is better and the other one is not, and that opinion seems to shift based on who you're talking to. But we'll assume that Jamar Chase is off the board. You could probably trade down and get like Rashad Bateman or whoever the next best receiver is, Rondale Moore. I don't know. I don't even know if Rondale Moore has like declared, but this is a pretty good receiver class too. So if you trade down a little bit, you'd still be able to get that receiver and maybe get a guard in the second or third round. And that's the other part of it, is that the guard that you get in the third round is probably not as big a drop off from that first round guard as the receiver that you get in the third round versus that first round receiver, even in a good receiver class. Like you might get lucky and land on a Michael Pittman or a Gabriel Davis, but like there's also a good chance that you land on even a Jalen Reagor, right? Who's like a first round receiver. But there's a chance that you land on like a Tyler Johnson in the fifth, who just hasn't produced so far for the Buccaneers. Mind you, they've got a couple of pretty good receivers ahead of them, but they also chose to sign additional receivers instead of having him kind of step up. So there's a couple of third, fourth, fifth round receivers that like Colin Johnson is like fine, right? That are just not producing. And so that's part of the calculation too, is that you're more likely to kind of see some 0-yard receivers in the third round. So the drop off is just bigger at receivers. So I think that you can, the draft is not only one round long. So if you pass up on a guard in the first round, you've got better opportunities to replace that guy than if you pass up a receiver, even in a good receiver draft.
Eric says, you're about to make the, I believe, 14th pick in the draft, and the top defensive lineman and the top offensive lineman on your boards are available. Who do you take and why?
So my understanding in this draft is that the defensive line draft is cheeks. It's bad. So in this case, definitely the defensive linemen if they're kind of equally graded. But even in a general draft, I think that adage probably holds true. Again, the draft is not one round long, and if you choose to take some talent a little bit later on in the draft, like Brian O'Neill in the second round, you're probably facing a little bit less of a drop off, because again, you're trying to just replace the worst guard in the league, and getting an average guy there is huge, right? So if you get a really good guard, that's like a nice bonus. But if you get a good defensive lineman, that's additive, because it's more additional pressures that you're creating, whereas it's not necessarily additional pressures that you're preventing with a guard. So yeah, probably the defensive lineman, and especially I guess in the context of this draft, which again I'm told, I don't know, but I'm told is just not a great defensive line draft.
Next question is from Professor Poop. On Professor Poop's universally well-regarded 0 to 10, 11-point poopiness inquiry and surveillance scale, what is our outlook for 2021? Given cap and holes, I'm a tad dubious. 0 meaning not poopy at all, certain Super Bowl contender, and 10 meaning Jets-level fecal hurricane.
Well, I don't think we're going to have a Jets-level fecal hurricane, so not a 10. but they're also not the Chiefs. So I've broken a bunch of new ground here by saying that they're not as bad as the Jets or as good as the Chiefs.
Really, this is why people go to patreon.com Norse code for their analysis.
Right. On the 11-point scale, I'd say trying to figure this. The middle is 5, right? Yeah. I would say that they're probably at a 6, a little bit worse than average, which is how the team did this year, 7-9, right? A little bit worse than average, but because they're going to have to make some roster cuts, I think that might make up for the fact that they're going to get a bunch of really good talent back because of that cap space. So I would say it's a little bit worse than average. I think that our prior should be, there's good evidence that they'll be as good as they were this year, which is not very good. You make some adjustments to the fact that you're getting a bunch of players back, slash off of opt-out. So Michael Pierce, Eric Kendricks, Daniil Hunter, etc. But then you also have to make adjustments to the fact that you're going to lose Anthony Harris probably, and you're going to have to make some cap cuts, which with Kyle Rudolph maybe is not so bad, but with like Riley Reif probably could be. So I think that while they don't necessarily one-to-one balance out, you also have to throw in a little bit more chaos along the offensive coordinating position. I'd say it's a little bit worse than average, which I think is a 6.
Next question is we got a couple quick ones from from Aaron, who asks, while many value a cornerback above a defensive tackle or a guard, since we essentially have CB1 and CB2 set for next year, would you prefer the Vikings draft a defensive tackle or guard over cornerback 3, despite the difference in positional value?
I think so. Like I do think that nickel corners are remarkably important. And so I don't want to downgrade the significance of that position, especially because typically when you're drafting a nickel corner, you're drafting a slot guy, where the Vikings already have that guy. When they get a nickel corner, they're going to get an outside guy and move Jeff Gladney inside probably. So those guys are a little bit, I'm not going to say more difficult to find, but you kind of have to pay up a little bit more in the draft to find them. So that all said, the fact that the Vikings are like 70% in nickel or something like that, would tell you that this guy is essentially a starter. But that guard is going to be playing every down. That defensive tackle is going to be playing close to every down. I think I would take that defensive tackle without the context of knowing that this draft might have a pretty poor selection at defensive tackle if there is one worth drafting in the first round. So yeah, I would take that defensive tackle. You're probably going to get more snaps from them. You're probably going to end up with that nickel corner is probably not going to be on a top receiver. I assume at some point Dancer is going to start shadowing, and so you're not going to have to worry too much about that guy being on that cornerback 3 being on their top guy. And so I think that despite the difference in pure cornerback versus defensive tackle or pure cornerback versus guard value, the fact that they're just not going to be there on every down and that there's a significant difference between cornerback 1 and cornerback 3, I think that's enough for you to say, hey, we should probably grab that defensive tackle or guard.
Next question. While it's clear the offense outperformed the defense, would it still be a better strategy to focus on maximizing the offense with the draft/free agent strategy, adding a starting guard or 2, a new wide receiver 3, backup quarterback, etc., then trying to shore up the defense with the anticipated return of Hunter, Pierce, Kendricks, and Barr, likely leading to some improvement? Basically, should we shoot for an elite offense, or a mediocre defense versus a good offense and a good defense?
I think you'll gain more wins by improving the defense. Like, I understand the appeal of having an elite offense. You'll always have an answer to when you're down a couple of scores. You can always find a way to score. I don't know that you're going to get there necessarily with more investment in the offense. I don't think that if you surrounded Cousins with like the Packers offensive line and the Cowboys receiving core and I guess Dalvin Cook, that suddenly you're going to have the number 2 or the number 3 offense in the NFL. Like, I think if Kirk Cousins has the best available supporting cast possible, you probably have like a top 5 offense, but you're not going to have the number 1 or anything like that. So you're never going to be like, they're down 3 scores entering the fourth quarter. I have absolute faith. I've got complete confidence that they'll be able to pull this out. I think that you should just improve your point differential in as many ways as possible. And in some ways that means adding more points to your offense, which there's no upper bound to. And so there's usually more potential there. or reduce the number of points that you give up on defense, which there is a lower bound to, but the Vikings are not near it. And so I think that there's a bunch of marginal advantage to be gained by improving the defense. Yeah, you'll get Pierce, Hunter, Kendricks, and Barr back, but you're going to lose a couple of guys, and who knows that those corners are going to actually perform at the level that you want them to. Like, we don't know that Jeff Gladney is good. We're just kind of expecting that at this point. So I would invest a little bit more in the defense because I think there's more points to save than there are points to gain.
Finally, from him, if you had the ability to eat any food you wanted to without any negative health consequence, but every time you bit into food it would scream, would you choose this life? Note, in my mind, only you would hear the scream and they would be internal. So no noise-canceling headphones is a cheat.
Right. Yeah, those are fair restraints. So if it was I could have any food at any time and then also that food didn't have any negative health consequences, I would consider this depending on whether or not the screams change as I continue eating. If the screams changed, absolutely not. But if I could conjure any food at any time and also there was no negative health consequences, that's what I considered. But I don't think that that's what this question is asking. I think it's just asking, health consequences don't matter. But you still have to find a way to acquire the food and through normal circumstances, in which case, absolutely not. I clearly am concerned about my health in terms of the way that I eat, but not so much that I'm going to subject myself to screams, especially if the screams change. I think is an underrated part of this, is that if the food is responding to the way that you're eating it, that's a no-go. I would not be able to eat.
This is where I sound like a sociopath. As the skinnier one of the two of us, yes, you can make that sort of claim, but if I'm able to,
I understand. Yeah, that's fair enough.
Yeah, I can. And as somebody who is just used to ignoring the screams that I hear daily from the army that I have around me, it's really easier to tune things out than you'd think. And my self-control has always been crap. So no, I think that even if it was something I'd have to make, like tonight I ended up making the thing from Binging with Babish. It's the baked ziti thing. That has that has ricotta cheese and mozzarella and all that, and
bakes.
It's so good, just so. And tonight I added a little bit of extra pork in it too for the sauce and a little bit of special stuff. And I'm sitting here just mowing down on this mountain of cheese and starch and sugary tomato stuff, and I'm going, I'm actually trying to lose weight at the moment. as I just eat out of the pan for that third, for that non-existent third plate. And I go, if I had to endure the screams, it might encourage me to stop eating it a little bit. But if I'm losing weight by eating it and all I have to do is just ignore screaming, I can probably accomplish that. I ignore screaming all the time.
Yeah, you definitely sound like a sociopath.
Yeah, this is the sociopath answer, but fine. Anyone who has this number of kids turns into the villain anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Andrew Grant asks, "Hi there from Down Under. Love the show. Keeps me in touch with all things Vikings from a long way away. In Australia, we have a sports term of a, quote, flat track bully, or plural, flat track bullies. Britain, Australia, sports, a sportsman or a sports team that dominates over inferior sides, but falls to opponents of similar or higher standing. With Kirk Cousins' third season in purple done and dusted, is it fair to say this describes what he is?"
No, because and maybe my initial response to this question was no, because the Vikings always play down to their opponents. Maybe it's a little bit different if it's just a question about Kirk Cousins. And his inability to necessarily overcome teams like a winning record or good defenses. But I remember tracking Kirk Cousins specifically against the quality of defense that he played and if there was a ceiling to his level of play based off of whether or not it's a high-quality defense. Because for a while I thought that was the case, and I tested it. And no, that's not the case. There's some pretty high-level defenses that he can perform really well against, including, for example, the Saints defense is not so bad this year. In most of the years that the Vikings have done well against them. So No, he's done well against some good defenses. When the Seattle defense was pretty good, he wasn't too bad against them. It was really more the Vikings defense against the Seattle offense that was the problem. So, no, I wouldn't say that Kirk Cousins is a flat track bully. That feels really weird to say, especially because I know now that people kind of say it habitually, casually, and now I'm just saying it like intentionally, and that always sounds different, especially in an American accent. But no, I don't think Kirk Cousins qualifies as that, and the Vikings definitely don't because they keep on playing to the quality of their opponent.
Definitely. And, I although I do enjoy the term done and dusted.
I love that.
We need to incorporate that more. Raul asks, what feelings did you have when Marcus Epps made that incredible interception in the Philadelphia Eagles-Washington Warthogs game? More importantly, which active former Viking, non-Diggs category, would you want on next year's roster?
Active former. So, man, if Teddy Bridgewater was good, that'd be an easy one. But he's not that.
No, that's definitely, boy, that definitely seems like the clock is hitting midnight really quickly.
Yeah, and he evidently ever since the lower body injury, so for partway through the season, he's just been much worse. But you want a more durable quarterback than that anyway.
Most likely, yes. As we were just talking about the Alex Smith thing earlier, Everson Griffin seems to want to be signed by anyone at this point.
Yeah, and someone tweeted at him that they wanted him back with the Vikings, and he retweeted it. Like he seemed to be a pretty big fan of that idea. And I'm trying to think of other like currently active players. I guess Josh Klein counts, but I'm not, I guess, pining for him. It's just like a baffling decision, but no other team picked him up. So there might be something that's preventing any team from signing him, which is just very weird. Active former Viking. Yeah, there's not that many anymore, right? Like I'm trying to think of, because like I don't like, Jarius Wright. What about that?
Is he still active somewhere?
Yeah, I guess he didn't catch my eye this year.
Yeah, I was going to say he was.
He's currently a free agent. Oh, that's weird.
Yeah, he was on Carolina, and then they, I believe, let him go this year.
Oh man, no one signed him. You just have him. He's right there.
Yep,
he's only like 30.
That is a utility man right there. You could also, just say Cordarrelle Patterson just so that there's like a positive.
Honestly, yeah. I would absolutely love that.
Yeah, I don't mean.
Because you don't expect him to play receiver at this. Like, no one is like, yeah, why aren't you catching more? Like, who cares?
Nope, this is a glaring hole in the Vikings play.
Yeah.
Let's just put him back there. We don't have to worry about anything for a couple of years. He'll bring it out to the 28 just about every time. We'll be fine.
Yeah.
That seems to work. Logan asks, who should Vikings fans root for in the playoffs? Also, which team is most likely to pull, quote, a Vikings in the playoffs? I don't even know what that means anymore. Does that mean tragic loss, or does that mean upset against the Saints? Because Bears, I'm looking in your general direction.
Yeah, who to root for? So obviously you want to root against the Packers, Bears, Saints, and Seahawks. So who's left? Let's take a look at the playoffs. Obviously the AFC.
Yeah, I literally was about to say, well, that's pretty much the entire AFC then.
Yeah, but in the NFC, who would be interesting enough and fun enough to cheer for? Well, not Washington. Jesus, I totally forgot they made the playoffs. And the Rams and the Buccaneers? Yeah, wow. Screw this NFC slate. Actually, no, if John Wolford starts for the Rams, which seems pretty unlikely, I'm cheering for the Rams. That's funny as hell. But other than that, yeah, I can't imagine cheering for Tom Brady. Washington just feels gross to cheer for. I want Dan Snyder to have happy things happen to him. And then it's funny if the Bears pay Trubisky, but it's not funny if it ends up working and he wins. So,
well, no. What if? Hold on.
Winning one playoff game, that's still too much fodder. No, I can't have it.
If he wins one playoff game and then next year goes right back to the level of play that we're all used to, I think that's worth it. Plus, it involves the Saints.
I think they sign him either way. I don't want that playoff win to be in Bears fans' minds when I'm arguing with them next year?
I don't know. I don't know if you want to leave this up to chance, because they left it up to chance last year.
I also just don't think many Vikings fans just want to cheer for the Bears at all anyway. Obviously, it's against the Packers, so I guess in this case, or not. No, it's not against the Packers. The Packers are the number 1 seed, so it's against the Saints, right?
Yes.
So in this case, yeah, I could totally see it. Like, that's fine. Someone has to win that game, and it'd be funnier, I guess, if it's Trubisky and then he just gets blown out right after that. But like, honestly, I just don't. I guess I'm cheering for the Rams, and that sucks because they don't have a quarterback right now. Even though they've got a great defense, I'm cheering for the Rams. I want Aaron Donald to have a trophy. And then I'm looking at this whole AFC slate, and I like everybody except the Steelers. Like, I'll cheer for any of these guys.
Anybody but the Steelers. Yeah. Dr. Matson asks, in honor of James's love of bingo, what should be on the Vikings offseason bingo card? Some ideas. Needing a new offensive coordinator. Note, this was received before the information came out about Kubiak. Cutting popular veteran player. Draft pick that Arif Hassan NFL hates. Spielman trading draft picks would have to be the middle square, right? Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the middle square.
No, that's exactly what would end up having to happen there.
Probably memes about drafting a cornerback high. That's got to be on the bingo.
Yep. Vikings Twitter being upset that the best available quarterback was not taken.
Yep, that's another one. Let's see. Arguments about whether or not you want scheme fits along the offensive line. I remember a lot of that. Let's see.
More recently anyway, there's the discussion on Dakota Dozier and his worth. The baffling re-sign is also something that.
Yeah. The opposite of the cutting the popular veteran player is the baffling re-sign. Yep. Yeah, that's a good one.
Like,
the old Charlie Johnson.
Yep. All of a sudden, you're giving Dakota Dozier 3 years for $45 million, and you're saying like, how? Why? Like, nope. That's just what we're doing. That's the business that we're in. Anytime you can give Dakota Dozier that much money or that little money, and he accepts, you got to take it.
I remember in camp, I asked Charlie Johnson, I was like, hey, your PFF grade is like pretty bad.
And he didn't leave. He still listened to your question.
Right. And I was like, a lot of people, including PFF, I phrased it a little bit differently. I didn't put myself out there because I'm a coward. But I said, a lot of people, including PFF, kind of judge your play to be really, poor. A, do you agree that your performance last year was subpar? B, what are you going to do about that kind of going forward? And I totally forgotten the Vikings had just re-signed him to like an extension. And he's like, well, the Vikings don't think so. And they're the only ones that matter. They just signed me to a new deal. And I was like, oh, if I was him, I wouldn't have a different answer. I disagree. The Vikings clearly screwed up. But like, if the Vikings paid me a couple extra $1 million, I would think I was doing a pretty good job too.
Yeah, the baffling re-sign is a 100% hallmark of the offseason. I would have to include that. Beef Brewski asks, for James's theology corner, let's ignore Arif's Nietzschean account of the suffering of Vikings fans, henceforth known as Anatofisov, which is a terrible acronym, which stands for Arif's Nietzschean account of the suffering of Vikings fans. And I'd like you to provide a more theological response, perhaps involving judgment and sin, as to why Vikings fans must suffer.
Okay, before you do that, Jay, I want to point out, this is more like a Dostoevsky-esque account of the suffering of Vikings fans. Like, a Nietzschean account would argue that the suffering and struggle is like good because it forces us to persist to be better. I mean, like, if we wanted to commit to the eternal recurrence, would you repeat this life again? Nietzsche would argue that you've wasted yourself if you don't immediately respond enthusiastically with yes, regardless of the amount of suffering that you had. Nietzsche thinks the suffering and the struggle is good, right? And I say it doesn't have a moral value. The universe just happens to be cruel. So it's different. I'm just saying it's different.
Yeah, that's that is certainly different.
We definitely have at least one like professor of philosophy that listens to this, so I'm looking forward to the email telling me how I screwed that up.
And we've had multiple clergy who have signed up for either the Patreon or have sent in messages via Twitter. So it's not completely outside the lines here. And I'm trying to be as non-blasphemous as humanly possible as I'm answering this.
This podcast?
Good
luck.
I'm trying to do something different this year, Reef. Okay, new year, new you, sort of thing. You know, it is kind of fitting that it was pointed out on the. This is my sermon. You know, it is kind of fitting as we were doing the Zoom watch along a couple days ago, I believe on Sunday, that it was pointed out that there were things mentioned by me that weren't necessarily part of the theology corner that hadn't been picked up by people before. My repeated mentioning of the suffering of Job as the character of, you know, just constantly, you know, every.
I thought that was like fairly like clear and obvious, but I guess
it was something that hadn't necessarily been pointed out as part of James's theology corner.
Oh no, that's the point. Yeah, it wasn't part of that. We just kind of made references to Job
because it's the obvious parallel is that, you know, you live your best life. You are the fan. You're doing your best to support, you know, the team mentally. Perhaps you buy a jersey. Perhaps you buy buy somebody a Christmas gift, a hat or something. You go to the game. You cheer on the team and everything. And your love is met with nothing but disappointment. You know, it constantly feels like there's some form of a test, and you want there to be some sort of a positive thing at the end of this. You just like, I just have this undying faith of this thing, and I don't know what to tell you, but Browns fans are in the playoffs for the first time in like damn near 20 years, and they're dancing in the street. Bills fans have a team that is built for the postseason and looks like a juggernaut going into it, and they have 4 straight losses in a Super Bowl. I don't know if the Vikings can climb that mountain. I want them to so badly. You know, I pulled just as a quick Google, just because I wanted to cheat on this. I pull up a passage from 2 Corinthians, chapter 4, verses 8 and 9, which says, "We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed." And I feel like that being the first thing that came up on this website that I Googled is the best possible way to describe Vikings fanhood. It's not completely hopeless. There is stuff to wish for. There's still stuff that you can have faith in, but it is difficult, to say the very least, to watch good things happen to other teams.
I'll just add this though. In the parable of Job, part of it is there's like a guaranteed salvation at the end if you've got faith, which I don't know that any Vikings fan has that kind of faith. And second, there's like an implied obvious moral value to maintaining faith, where it's like, is there like a clear obvious moral value to continuing being a Vikings fan?
Unless you're Sid Davey, probably not.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I don't know that the mandate is as clear.
Yes.
So it's the parable of Job, but somehow worse.
Yeah, this is where it reflects to remind everyone when he's talking about the corners that he's an atheist. So
yeah, right. Yeah, like I clearly know what I'm talking about here.
Yeah, Don from Ohio asks, if I buy Luke Braun NFL an OnlyFans video, Cameo, not an OnlyFans video from Luke Braun. I'm going to keep that in. If I buy a Luke Braun Cameo video, will it sound like he has a plastic bag over his head and a hand over his mouth the whole time? His mic sounded so terrible to start. It was
like the worst version of Bron Shapiro. We couldn't.
That's terrible. Also from Don from Ohio, are the Ohio State Buckeyes the greatest 11th ranked team in the nation ever? Probably.
Yeah, I don't know. Sure, dude.
Ohio State fans really, really have that chip on their shoulder about the 11th best ranking that had been put out earlier, and it was fun to see a comeuppance. If you look at it statistically, the AP actually did a ranking of the greatest teams of all time, and they actually listed Ohio State as third overall. So I don't think you're being underrated on the whole. It goes.
Who's ahead of the Alabama, USC?
It goes Oklahoma, Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan,
Wow.
and then Notre Dame, USC, Texas, Nebraska. Penn State is 9, and Tennessee. I would have actually expected Penn State to be up there a little higher.
I suppose the Associated Press is probably counting all those vacated wins, huh?
Yeah, they certainly are. There's a number of question marks involving Penn State's numbers and their history as well. So you're not being underrated. I'm curious to see what happens in the national championship game, but you're not being underrated. Also, finally from Don from Ohio, with the success of the Zoom calls this year, how about a Zoom call watch along in March or April of a prior Vikings game? I'm certainly not opposed to it. The Zoom calls were a hell of a lot of fun this year. We'll probably figure something out here later. If you'd like to be a part of the Zoom calls, of course, you'll want to go to patreon.com/NorseCode in order to get access to the link and interact with us on there. So at one point we had Dusty, we had you, we had Dusty, I say we have me, but we had Eric Thompson, we had Luke Braun on there. There were a lot of Vikings media minds on there to get breakdowns from, or Eric's prognostications of what might actually be happening
in the future. Yeah. We probably could have done a better job talking about the actual game. So sorry about
nonsense.
that.
At some point we were bringing up the Mandalorian and the Last Jedi, and why one of the listeners needed, or one of the people on the call needed to stop doing what he was doing and watch watch Goodfellas. Like there was a number of
other games, for sure.
Which he did tweet out to me that he was sitting down and watching it that night. So he at least somebody took our advice that particular evening. So good on that. So that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Again, we are going to go into more of a once every 2 weeks ish sort of routine while we go through the off season. Obviously coming back in when there are more important things to be covering, say Zimmer is re-signed or whatever, we would come on for that. Or if the Vikings decide they need a new GM, we would definitely come on for that sort of thing. So you will be hearing from us. Don't worry, we're not going completely dark for the off season. We'll still be back every 2-ish weeks or so. Arif, where can they find your written work?
Yeah, so you can find me over at The Athletic, theathletic.com/Arif-Hassan. I've got my Players of the Year coming out tomorrow morning, which is I was distracted in the middle of this episode and ruined our I guess we didn't have a perfect game going, but I ruined James's night by adding another edit point. I was talking back and forth with my editor about a huge mistake I made. Glad he caught it. That's coming out tomorrow morning. And then Wednesday, maybe afternoonish, I'm going to publish kind of an off-season plan, kind of where to go from here with the Vikings, and that's probably going to be pretty long as well.
All right, so that is going to be it for this episode and really this full season of Norse Code. Obviously, we would have liked the Vikings to go to the playoffs, but sometimes the playoffs, the real playoffs, are the friends you make along the way. So, for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. Thanks so much for coming to us for your Vikings information this season. And please remember that all things are possible through the power and grace of Mr. Ben DiNucci. And we will be back soon. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's official Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. You can also find his written work at theathletic.com. I am your podcast host and producer, and my name is James Bagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at BigMono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can make a recurring monthly contribution by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. A donation of $3.50 per month does get you bonus material from the show and much more. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.